RWBY is a show that tries to do a lot, and one of the things it tries to do is romance. Certainly nothing too deep, but the characters have had past relationships and are making new ones as the show goes on. However, I feel the show stumbles in terms of executing upon these relationships, and I'd like to take the time to discuss these here. So let's start with... So, I get that I shouldn't expect super realistic depictions of love in an action anime. Honestly, I should be glad that there isn't a princess to save in the show. But Rooster Teeth are trying to tackle RWBY's significant others with some level of realism, which leads to a clear problem. No one just tries dating in the show. Jean kissed Pyrrha, and then he gets to spend 3 volumes acting like his wife of 10 years was murdered. He's been so upset over someone who could have been his girlfriend. Everyone, from the characters to the writers, seem to have forgotten that the two were not in love. Pyrrha may have loved him, but they weren't dating. Hell, even right after the kiss. Jean screaming and crying and throwing his phone around as if he was about to lose the most important person in his life. Close friends? Yes. Potential to get closer if they both survived? Sure, but with Pyrrha's death, their relationship was nothing more than a one-sided crush and a kiss. Similarly, we have Blake and Yang. We go from awkward misunderstandings at the farm to refusing to let go of each other on the airship. Where did this relationship begin? It just happens. Suddenly they're holding hands and giving each other looks where they've barely even spoken to each other during the volume. Love always appears so suddenly in the show that it's hard to tell when it's happening sometimes. When did Blake and Yang get so close? When did Jean start to care about Pyrrha so much? Perhaps we wouldn't have these questions if it weren't for... Jean attempts to woo Weiss for 2.5 volumes before Pyrrha and him have a serious discussion. Before Pyrrha's death, Jean spends almost as much time pining after Weiss as Pyrrha spends pining after him. Jean may spend more time with Pyrrha, but it's not a reciprocated thing. Most of that 1154 is Pyrrha trying to drop hints to him. Heck, a good chunk of that time is from Volume 2, where Pyrrha puts her feelings aside to try to help Jean with asking out Weiss. On the flip side, most of the screen time Jean and Weiss share is dedicated to him trying to flirt with her. Pyrrha's stuck explaining Aura, or helping him with bullies when she's on screen with Jean. But really, that's small potatoes when compared to Blake. Blake has shared more lines of dialogue with Sun than she has with RWBY, Weiss, and Yang combined. Since Volume 1, the show has been pushing Blake and Sun. His wink leaves her dumbfounded.
I knew you would look better without the bow.
They go to the dance together. She blushes when he points to her in the tournament. He gets the awkward, "I don't like your boyfriend" shenanigans at Menagerie.
I like him.
Mom!
They get to call each other my hero. They get a moment at Haven. She gives him a kiss to say goodbye. A single throwaway line of...
Feels like you're just letting her go.
It was never about that, Brainiac.
Doesn't change all the flirting and relationship building that's happened between them. What was the point of all that if suddenly Blake's got the hots for Yang in Volume 6? What kind of setup has Bumblebee gotten? Yang asks Blake to save her dance, which resulted in 5 seconds of them dancing and then Yang leaving to let Sun take over. We can see Yang's crying when she rushes in to save Blake, if you pause the video. Blake running away really upset Yang, and she confessed to needing Blake here for me to Weiss. By all accounts, this seems almost as one-sided as Jean and Pyrrha. But then Volume 6 happens. Now that Sun's gone, Blake just defaults to the next closest love interest. She's constantly just looking at Yang and doing stuff to get them alone together. What happened to all that flirting she's been doing with Sun? When did Blake start getting interested in Yang? Don't get me wrong, I have no issues with Bumblebee, but I just wish there had been some form of setup to it before the volume the two got together. 5 years of the show putting Sun and Blake together has just been thrown out the window as, with the start of Volume 6, Blake only seems to care about starting a relationship with Yang, and it just feels rushed. Every other relationship was introduced with the characters. Ren and Nora are established not only at the same time, but also with the implication of their shared past, pre-established friendship, and Nora's obvious crush on him. Similarly, Pyrrha wastes no time trying to chat up Jean, who in turn has already been flirting with Weiss since the previous episode. Sun shoots Blake a wink before they even share words. Neptune introduces himself to Weiss by smooth-talking her. But Blake and Yang have seemed completely platonic until Volume 6, where suddenly Blake can't leave Yang alone. Blake keeps jumping to Yang's side, but it feels like Yang still needs to clear the air with her. Yang had been real upset with Blake in Volume 5, but we never get to see them talk about that. Their interaction at the farm felt like it was leading to them airing that dirty laundry, but they never do. The fact that Blake's line of "I'll protect you" clearly offended Yang is never discussed. The allusion to it during the finale with the line, "We're protecting each other," feels hollow because of this. Did Blake just decide, well, since she doesn't want me protecting her, we'll just protect each other, internally? Did the two talk about why Yang was upset about it off camera? I think these characters are cute together, but I just wish their relationship had a believable setup, rather than rushing to the conclusion of forming a relationship. If they had just taken their time to establish Bumblebee believably, then this moment could have been great. It just feels like we're missing a scene where the two get to talk. This wouldn't be a problem if we hadn't just spent the last 5 volumes setting up Blake with Sun, but it also doesn't help how ambiguous they've been with Blake and Yang's relationship. Yang jumps to Blake's aid at the fall of Beacon, but I'm sure she would have rushed in to save any of her friends in a similar position. Yang seems dumbstruck by Blake when she shows up at Haven. Is this because of love, or because she just wasn't expecting to see her? Yang said she needed Blake here for her. Is that because she has feelings for Blake, or because Blake's her closest friend? Does Blake rush to help Yang with her bag because she wants to start getting closer with Yang, or because she's paranoid about helping her now handicapped because of her ex-boyfriend teammate? They seem to think just having the girls stare at each other a lot in the last episode of Volume 5 was good enough setup for all this, but it wasn't because of how ambiguous they had been. If they wanted to lead into Blake and Yang dating, then make it clear. Sun does this awkward wave to the group and pushes Blake forward at the end of the finale. If this was meant to be a Sun prompting Blake to go talk to her new love interest Yang thing, then don't dance around the message. Make it clear Sun's pushing her to talk to Yang, rather than vaguely towards the whole group. Maybe even give him a line like, "Go get her," or "Try talking to her," or something. RT's insistence on being vague worked when there was no canon ship to consider. Bumblebee fans used every minute interaction to facilitate their ship, and now it seems RT is banking on that to support the actual pairing. That's not good enough. After the small altercation at the barn in episode 5, these two don't have a one-on-one conversation again until Yang drives Blake to the communication tower in episode 10. Having them hold each other's hands a bunch and giving each other looks and making them stand close enough that they're usually on screen together is not a valid substitute to actual setup. Everything just conveniently puts them within proximity to each other. Forcing them into situations where they only have each other to talk to is not the same as relationship building. But that's not a problem unique to Bumblebee. Characters rarely ever get to talk to just a friend if they have a love interest. Blake and RWBY get to bond over their shared interest in reading, but then they don't address each other again directly until RWBY calls after Blake as she runs away. I could count the amount of one-on-one conversations Blake and RWBY's had on one hand. Same for Yang talking with Weiss. For being a team, the girls sure do keep to their respective friend groups. And it's all the same for Juniper. Pyrrha has spoken with Ren and Nora about as often as Blake has with Weiss and RWBY, and cross-team interactions are reserved for Jean and Weiss flirting, and RWBY giving Jean life advice. All 8 of these kids are supposed to be friends, but they never get to interact casually. The first time Jean even said Yang's name was when he referred to Raven being Yang's mom. I don't think I've ever heard Weiss, Blake, or Yang say Ren or Nora's name. The longest interaction Pyrrha's ever had with a member of Team RWBY was when she explained her semblance to RWBY and Weiss. And we're supposed to believe her death affected RWBY so much it activated her eyes? The only ones who regularly address their friends are Ren and Nora, and it's mostly because they're relegated to comic relief and exposition. They have to be allowed to talk to everybody to get a chance to yell their jokes out. They need to address the whole group to explain their lore or discuss character growth. This means that Ren and Nora feel like they're closer friends with RWBY than Blake is. Heck, they feel closer to RWBY than most of her team. It's like the writers are scared to have the characters talk too much with their friends. We need to have the couples constantly interacting because we certainly aren't going to write a whole scene where they get to explore their relationship naturally. Which is crazy, because the one time they did do that, it was great. When Pyrrha and Jean get to sit down and talk about Destiny, the characters felt believable, and their relationship grew naturally and in an entertaining way. I hadn't cared about whether or not Pyrrha would get Jean until that moment. Letting the kids discuss their feelings for each other gets the audience invested, while also offering a natural way for the characters to develop. The only reason a character will willingly talk to a different member of the friend group is because they're talking about the love interest of one of them. But rather than letting us see the different ways the kids interact with the collective, depending on if they have deeper feelings for each other or not, the writers just stick couples permanently together. In this world, it seems like friendships only matter to create a love interest out of them. Unless, of course, you're already with your significant other. Ren and Nora may get to chat with the whole friend group, but that doesn't change another very significant problem. Since they're meant to be an item, Ren and Nora are treated like one entity. They're practically connected to each other, as if they can't go more than 5 feet apart without feeling pain. The two may get to speak with everyone in the cast, but they only develop around each other, what little development they actually get. We can't get Ren's backstory without also getting some of Nora's. Nora only kicks it into high gear once Ren's in trouble. The two are constantly protecting each other and doing team attacks, but they're not allowed to be individuals. Split the two apart and you're left with two half-written characters. Without a man to protect, Nora's just loud and energetic. Without Nora to calm down, Ren's just a fancy background character. The two don't exist outside of the sphere of their relationship. They may get the chance to talk to their friends, but they have to do it together. Their relationship was an inevitability. They didn't develop romantic feelings for each other, they didn't grow close throughout the events at school. They were introduced as a set, and refused to separate from each other. For 4 volumes, all we were doing was waiting for one of them to finally confess to the other, and while that confession was cute, it didn't really change anything. Since they were always together anyway, there's no difference in them being a couple, to the point people were unsure if they really were dating throughout Volume 5. With no change in behavior, Ren and Nora seem to just go back to being nebulously close after their moment on the airship. They behave exactly the same as before throughout their stay at Haven. It wasn't until Volume 6 where the two started to show how this development in their relationship has affected them. They get to hold on to each other and get to say cute things like, "my man." Now if we could just get to see how they are as individuals, too. Amidst all these complaints, there's one example I'd like to look at that I find to fly in the face of these persisting problems with the show. There's one pair who has the potential to turn out really solidly done, and that is... We've gotten a few small hints that Ruby and Oscar might form a couple, lovingly titled by the fans Rose Garden, and it's not hard to see why people might get excited by this pairing. The two seem to get along well and look good with each other. They're both pretty well-liked characters, and both are in important roles for the plot. Oscar getting flustered around her is charming, but I'm not sure if he behaves similarly with the other girls or not. Oscar gets to address the collective pretty regularly, but he's definitely had the most time getting to talk with Ruby, a product of the writers being too nervous to let people interact with those they have a platonic relationship with too much. However, unlike Ren and Nora, Ruby and Oscar are allowed to have their own adventures. They're not permanently entering combat together. In fact, we haven't gotten to see the two fight as a pair yet. It's nice that their motivations and characters comes first, and their relationship comes later. If there even is a relationship growing there. The excessive flirting of past pairings is totally absent with these two, replaced instead with friendly smiles and supportive dialogue. It feels like they're actually writing a believable friendship first that might lead to something more later. And even though Rose Garden feels more like a crush on Oscar's part than anything reciprocated, they've also allowed Oscar to form friendships outside of Ruby. Nora has clearly befriended him between calling him little cute boy and all the hugs she gives him. Nora and Oscar are friends, and clearly platonic ones at that. The fact that Nora is stapled to Ren helps to make it clear that there's no way she'd consider dating Oscar, but it's also not a necessary precaution. Nora and Oscar interact like siblings would, and it's nice to see that the writers are so capable to have a friendship like theirs without ever hinting at romantic feelings between the two. If they're setting up for Rose Garden, then it's been a slow burn so far, and that's okay. I'd rather let the characters and story take their time rather than force-feeding a sudden infatuation into the volume's conclusion. Now I just have to hope they don't suddenly have Oscar fall in love with a different character, or have Ruby start giving other people bashful looks. Wouldn't want all of this well-written setup to just be ignored for the actual ship to get the spotlight like we're supposed to suddenly care. And in the grand scheme of things, the less than amazing writing around the romance of RWBY is ultimately not that big of a deal. The nuances of an action anime love triangle isn't something worth writing 7 pages of a video discussion about. But as RWBY continues, these romances grow. It's not just a chain of unrequited affection anymore. These relationships are written to be taken seriously, and so need to be looked at as such. However, the problem with that is a problem that pervades the entire show. The writing is subpar. No matter how mature the message, the script and direction holds it back. I'd love to see Miles and Carrie refine their craft, so relationships aren't rushed over, and so we don't spend literal years setting up a non-applicable pairing. They've got the ideas, a strong foundation to solid storytelling. Now they just have to learn how to execute on them. And I know, big talk coming from an outsider looking in with all the hindsight in the world to reflect upon. But I'm not making this video to prove I'm better than the writers. I'm making it because I care about these characters in this show. I like seeing how these kids interact. Watching them form deeper friendships and relationships is fun. In theory. I want to be able to gush about how cute the couples are, but due to the reasons previously stated, I find it hard to do. RT's got a good thing going with a potential Ruby and Oscar ship, and I'd love to see the pair grow closer in a natural and fun way. I'm hoping that the RWBY crew can look to their past mistakes and learn from them, and be able to execute upon these great ideas in a satisfying way.